The first time I realized I might not make it through the night, it wasn't the pain. It was the silence between my breaths. I remember staring at the ceiling, counting seconds like they were slipping through my fingers, one by one, wondering which one would be the last that actually reached my lungs. The apartment smelled like rain and something metallic, like pennies left in water too long, and I could hear the faint hum of traffic 3 floors below, life continuing like nothing had happened, like I wasn't lying there on the cold hardwood floor trying to convince my body to cooperate. I didn't scream, couldn't. Every attempt felt like pushing against a locked door from the inside, my chest tight, each breath shallow and incomplete, like my body had forgotten how to do something it had done automatically for 24 years. My left side throbbed in a way that didn't feel temporary, didn't feel like something that would fade by morning, and I knew enough from my EMT training to understand what that meant without needing a diagnosis. I curled slightly, not out of fear but instinct, the kind your body chooses for you when your mind can't keep up, and I focused on one thing: staying conscious. The room tilted every time I blinked, and I forced my eyes open again, locking onto the faint crack in the ceiling paint above me, tracing it like a map, something to hold onto while everything else felt like it was slipping. My phone was somewhere near the couch. I could see the faint glow of the screen reflecting off the leg of the coffee table, cracked from last week when it hit the floor, just another thing I told myself I'd fix later. Later felt like a luxury now. I dragged my hand across the floor, fingertips brushing against dust and something sticky I didn't want to think about, inching forward until my shoulder protested and I had to stop, breathe, try again. The world narrowed to that small rectangle of light, to the idea that if I could just reach it, I could fix this or at least change it. My fingers finally closed around the edge of the phone, and I pulled it toward me, the screen lighting up my face in a pale glow that made everything feel even more unreal. I didn't open the call app. My hands were shaking too much for that, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew I might not get the words out fast enough. Instead, I opened messages. There was one number I remembered without thinking, drilled into me from months of training and long shifts and repetition. I typed it slowly, carefully, double-checking each digit even as my vision blurred at the edges. Or at least I thought I did. My thumb hovered for a second, then pressed send before I could second-guess it. Please help. He broke my ribs. I can't breathe. No punctuation beyond what mattered. No extra words. Just the truth. I let my hand fall back against the floor, the phone resting against my palm as I stared at the screen, waiting for nothing and everything at the same time, listening to the rain tap against the window like it was counting with me, like it was keeping time while I tried to hold on just a little longer. I always thought help would sound like sirens, loud and chaotic, something you could not ignore even if you tried. But when my phone buzzed in my hand, it was quiet, almost polite, like it did not understand the urgency of what I had just asked for. For a second, I did not even look at it, because looking meant hoping, and hoping felt dangerous when every breath still came in shallow, uneven attempts that never quite filled my lungs the way they were supposed to. Then it buzzed again, and this time the vibration against my palm felt heavier, like it carried weight, like it meant something. I forced my eyes down, focusing on the screen through the blur, blinking until the words sharpened enough to read. Location. That was it. No greeting. No hesitation, just a single word that landed differently than I expected. Not soft, not concerned, but direct. I swallowed or tried to, my throat dry, and I realized I had not sent my address. I had not sent anything useful beyond the truth of what was happening. My fingers moved again, slower this time, clumsier, typing out the street name, the building number, the apartment, each letter taking more effort than it should have. The send button felt heavier the second time, like I understood now that this was real, that someone was actually on the other side of that message. 3 dots appeared almost immediately, then disappeared, then came back again, like whoever it was did not waste time thinking about what to say. Stay conscious. Do not move. The words settled into me in a way I did not expect, like instructions I had heard before, like something from training, except this time I was the one on the ground, the one trying to follow directions instead of giving them. I let out a breath that barely made it halfway and focused on doing exactly that, staying where I was, keeping my eyes open, counting again, 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Another message came through. I am coming. I stared at that line longer than the others, something about it not fitting, not matching the situation the way I thought it should. There was no question, no hesitation, no who is this or what happened, just certainty. Like the decision had already been made before I ever sent the message. It should have comforted me, I think, but instead it made something tighten in my chest that had nothing to do with my breathing. The tone was wrong. Not wrong like careless, but wrong like controlled, like whoever was typing those words was used to being listened to, used to giving instructions that people followed without asking why. I shifted slightly, immediately regretting it as a sharp wave of pain reminded me why I should not. And I froze again, pressing my hand against the floor to steady myself. The rain outside had picked up, louder now against the window, and for a moment it drowned out everything else, even the faint sounds inside the apartment. Even the presence I knew was still somewhere behind me. I focused on the phone again, waiting for something else, another message, more instructions, anything that would explain why this felt less like calling for help and more like stepping into something I did not understand. The screen stayed still, the last message glowing faintly in the dark, and I realized that whoever had answered was not waiting for me to respond anymore. They were already moving. The silence after the last message stretched longer than it should have. And that was when I realized something had shifted in the room without anyone saying a word. It was not loud or obvious, not the kind of change you could point to and name, but it pressed against my awareness all the same, like the air itself had thickened. I kept my eyes on the phone for a second longer, staring at the words "I am coming" as if they might explain themselves if I waited long enough. But they did not change, did not soften, did not offer anything more. They just sat there, certain and unmoving. Behind me I heard a step, not rushed, not heavy, just deliberate, like someone who already knew exactly what they were going to find. My body reacted before my mind could catch up, every muscle tightening even though I could not move fast enough to matter, and I felt the floor shift slightly as weight settled somewhere close. Jason had been quiet for too long. That was the first thought that cut through the fog. Quiet never meant calm with him. Quiet meant thinking. I closed my eyes for half a second, steadying my breathing the way I had been trained to do, in through the nose, out through the mouth, except it did not work the same anymore. Not with the sharp pull in my side reminding me that something inside me was not where it was supposed to be. The phone buzzed again, sudden and sharp in the silence, and I flinched before I could stop myself. Another message. Still there. Do not move. I almost laughed at that, not because it was funny, but because it was impossible, because there was nowhere for me to go even if I tried. I turned my head just enough to glance over my shoulder, and that was when I saw him, standing a few feet away, my phone now in his hand, the faint light from the screen reflecting across his face in uneven flashes. He was reading, not quickly, not skimming, but slowly, like he was taking in every word, measuring it against something only he understood. For a moment he said nothing. Then he looked at me, and the expression on his face was not anger the way I expected. It was something quieter, something colder, like he had stepped back from the situation and was now observing it instead of reacting to it. "Who is this, Emily?" he asked, my name sounding different in his voice, like it did not belong to me anymore. I opened my mouth, but the answer did not come out right away, because I did not know how to explain something I did not understand myself. I did not know who was on the other end of that message, only that they had answered too quickly, too precisely, like they had been waiting for something like this to happen. I tried to push myself up, just a few inches, enough to reach for the phone, but the movement sent another wave through my side that forced me back down, my breath catching halfway again. He noticed. Of course he did. His grip tightened slightly around the phone, not enough to break it, just enough to remind me that it was no longer mine, that whatever connection I had just made was now in his hands. "You think someone is coming for you," he said, almost conversational, like we were discussing something ordinary instead of this moment, this room, this distance between us that felt much smaller than it should have. I did not answer. I did not need to. The rain outside grew louder, tapping against the glass in uneven rhythms, and somewhere far off, a car passed, tires cutting through water, the sound fading quickly as it moved on. Life continuing, always continuing. He looked back down at the phone again, reading the last message one more time, and for a second, something flickered across his face that I could not quite place. Not fear. Not yet. but something close to uncertainty. And that was new. That was the first thing that felt different, the first crack in something I had thought was unbreakable. I focused on that, held on to it the same way I had been holding on to my breath, because if something could reach him, if something could make him pause, then maybe, just maybe, those words on my screen meant exactly what they said. I am coming. People think danger is loud, that it announces itself with raised voices and slammed doors. But the truth is it often arrives in the quietest moments, in the space where someone stops pretending. I saw that shift in Jason before he even spoke again. The way his shoulders settled. The way his grip on my phone changed from careless to deliberate, like it had suddenly become something important instead of just an object. He looked down at the screen one more time, then back at me, and there was something new in his expression now, something sharper, more focused, like he had found a thread he wanted to pull. You sent your location, he said, not asking, just stating it, and I felt my stomach tighten because I had not thought about that, had not considered that whatever connection I had just made was not private anymore. My address was right there, sitting in the open, visible to both of us, and for the first time since I hit send, doubt crept in, slow and cold. Who did I just call? The question echoed in my head without an answer, and I realized I had no control over what happened next. Not here, not like this. He took a step closer, and I instinctively tried to shift away, even though my body refused to cooperate the way I wanted it to, my hand pressing against the floor in a weak attempt to create distance that did not exist. The phone buzzed again in his hand, and this time he reacted faster, his thumb moving across the screen before I could even see what had come through. His eyes scanned the message, and whatever he read made him pause, not long, not dramatically, but enough for me to notice. That same flicker again, uncertainty, like something had entered the situation that he could not immediately control. He angled the screen slightly, not enough for me to read it fully, but I caught a glimpse of a single line before he tilted it back toward himself. Do not leave the apartment. That was all I saw, but it was enough to send a strange, unfamiliar feeling through me, something that did not quite reach relief, but came close. Jason let out a short breath through his nose, almost like a laugh, but without any humor in it. This is getting interesting, he said, his tone light in a way that felt forced, like he was trying to convince himself of something rather than me. He glanced toward the door, then back at the phone, weighing something I could not see, calculating in a way that made the room feel smaller, tighter. Whoever you texted thinks they can tell me what to do, he added, quieter now, more to himself than to me, and that was when I realized this was no longer just about me trying to get help. This had become something else entirely, something between him and the person on the other end of that message, something I had triggered without understanding it. Another sound cut through the room, faint at first, almost lost beneath the rain, but distinct enough that both of us heard it at the same time. Tires on wet pavement, slowing, not passing by but stopping. The subtle shift in sound that told you a vehicle had pulled up and was no longer moving. Jason's head turned toward the window, his body going still in a way I had never seen before, like every instinct he had was suddenly paying attention to something outside these walls. The phone in his hand buzzed once more, and this time he did not look at it right away. Instead, he kept his eyes on the door, on the thin barrier that separated this room from whatever had just arrived beyond it. The air changed again, heavier now, charged in a way that made it hard to think, hard to focus on anything except the growing sense that something was about to happen that none of us could stop. Finally, he looked down at the screen, his jaw tightening just slightly as he read the new message, and even from where I was lying, even through the blur and the distance, I could see it clearly this time. I am outside. There is a difference between someone saying they are outside and someone actually being there, and I realized that difference in the way the room reacted before I could even process the words themselves. Jason did not move right away, which was the first sign that something was off, because he always moved, always reacted, always filled space with noise or motion or something that made him feel in control, but now he just stood there, staring at the door like it might answer a question he had not figured out how to ask. I could hear it too now, more clearly, the soft rhythm of engines idling in the rain. Not one but several, the sounds steady and deliberate, like they were not in a hurry, like whoever had arrived was not worried about being seen or questioned or stopped. The rain hit the window harder, sliding down in uneven streaks that distorted the faint glow of headlights filtering through. The blinds, turning them into blurred shapes that moved slightly as if adjusting their position without ever leaving. My chest tightened again, not just from the way my body refused to cooperate, but from something else, something deeper, the realization that this was not normal, not the kind of help I had expected when I pressed send. Jason finally shifted, taking a slow step toward the window, his attention pulled outward now, away from me, away from the phone, and I felt the smallest, almost imperceptible shift in the balance of the room, like gravity had tilted just enough to give me space to breathe, even if it still hurt to try. He pushed the edge of the curtain aside with 2 fingers, just enough to look through, and I watched his expression change in a way I had never seen before, not anger, not frustration, but calculation giving way to something closer to recognition, like he understood what he was looking at even if he did not want to admit it. He let the curtain fall back into place, slower this time, more controlled, and for a second he said nothing, which was worse than anything he could have said, because it meant he was thinking again, reassessing, adjusting to something that had just entered his world without permission. The phone buzzed again in his hand, and this time he did not hesitate, his eyes dropping immediately to the screen, reading whatever message had come through with a focus that made his jaw tighten just slightly. He turned the phone toward himself more fully, blocking my view, but I did not need to see it to feel the shift, the way the air seemed to press inward, the way the silence stretched thinner, more fragile, like it could snap at any moment. Outside, a car door opened, the sound muted by the rain but unmistakable, followed by another, then another, each one spaced just enough apart to feel intentional, like a pattern instead of coincidence. Jason straightened slightly, his posture changing in response, not defensive exactly, but aware, like he was no longer the only one making decisions in this space. He looked down at me again, and this time there was something different in his eyes, something that had not been there before, something that made me realize that whatever was happening outside had already begun to affect him in ways he could not fully control. "You called someone you should not have," he said quietly, not accusing, not loud, just stating it like a fact he had finally accepted. I did not answer because I could not, because my focus had shifted too, away from him, toward the door, toward the presence on the other side of it that I had not seen yet but could feel all the same, like pressure building just beyond reach. The engines outside went quiet one by one, cutting off in a sequence that felt too precise to be random, leaving only the sound of rain and the faint echo of footsteps approaching, steady and unhurried, closing the distance between the outside world and this room with each step. Jason did not speak again. He did not move toward me or away from me. He just stood there, listening, the phone still in his hand, the screen casting a faint glow across his fingers, as if it were the only thing connecting him to whatever was about to happen next. And then, without warning, there was a soft, controlled sound at the door, not a knock, not a demand, just a presence announcing itself in the quietest way possible. Like whoever stood on the other side did not need permission to enter, only acknowledgement that they had arrived. The sound at the door was so soft it almost felt imagined, like something my mind created to give shape to the pressure building in the room, but the way Jason reacted told me it was real before I could fully process it. He straightened, just slightly, not stepping forward, not stepping back, just adjusting in place like someone preparing for something he could not yet see. The silence that followed stretched thin, every second pulling tighter, and I found myself holding my breath again without meaning to, waiting for something louder, something more forceful, something that matched the weight of what had arrived outside. It did not come. Instead, there was a quiet click, precise and controlled, the kind of sound that did not belong to hesitation or uncertainty. The door opened slowly, not pushed, not forced, just opened, like whoever stood on the other side had already decided they were coming in long before they ever touched the handle. The hallway light spilled into the apartment in a narrow line, cutting across the floor and stopping just short of where I lay, and for a moment, all I could see was shadow moving through that light, tall and steady, blocking it in pieces as someone stepped inside. He did not rush. That was the first thing I noticed. Whoever he was, he did not move like someone reacting to an emergency. He moved like someone who had already assessed the situation before arriving, like he knew exactly what he would find and had no reason to hurry. The rain followed him in only slightly, a faint trace on the edge of his coat, but the rest of him looked untouched by the storm, composed in a way that did not match the chaos inside this room. He stopped just inside the doorway, not closing it behind him, not announcing himself, just standing there long enough for the space to adjust around him, for the air to shift again in a way that made everything feel sharper, more defined. I could not see his face clearly at first, only the outline, the way the light caught the edges of his shoulders, the stillness in the way he held himself. But I felt it all the same, the presence, the weight of someone who did not need to prove anything to anyone in the room. Jason spoke first, because of course he did, his voice cutting through the silence in a way that sounded more controlled than I expected, like he was trying to match something he did not fully understand. "You lost," he said, the words simple, almost casual. But there was something under them now, something tighter, like he was measuring his tone carefully. The man at the door did not answer right away. He took one step forward, then another, each movement deliberate, unhurried, his gaze sweeping the room once, taking in everything, the broken glass, the overturned chair, me on the floor, Jason standing between us, and I realized in that moment that he was not looking for information. He was confirming it. When his eyes finally settled, they did not land on Jason first. They landed on me. Not with shock, not with urgency, but with focus, like everything else in the room had already been processed and set aside. Then, only then, did he shift his attention. The space between them felt smaller than it should have, even though neither of them had moved closer, like something invisible had drawn a line that both of them understood without needing to say it out loud. Jason lifted the phone slightly, almost instinctively, like it was something that might give him leverage, something that connected him to whatever had brought this man here. "You looking for her?" he asked, and there was a faint edge to his voice now, something that had not been there before, something that sounded less like control and more like testing. The man's gaze flicked briefly to the phone, then back to Jason, and when he finally spoke, his voice was lower than I expected, calm in a way that made it harder to read, harder to predict. "You should not have answered that message," he said, not to me, not even to Jason, but like a statement placed into the room itself, something that carried meaning beyond the words. Jason let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but it did not reach his eyes. "And you should not be here," he replied, the words sharper now, more direct, like he was trying to reclaim something that had already started to slip. The man took another step forward, closing just enough distance to make the shift undeniable, and for the first time since he entered, the light caught his face clearly. I did not know him, I was sure of that, but the certainty in the way he stood, the way the room seemed to bend slightly around his presence, made something inside me go still in a way that had nothing to do with fear. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "She asked for help," he said simply, his eyes never leaving Jason's, and there was something final in the way he said it, like the rest of the conversation had already been decided before either of them spoke. There is a moment when control slips, not loudly, not in some dramatic collapse, but in a quiet shift where the person who thought they held everything realizes they are no longer the one deciding what happens next. And I saw that moment pass across Jason's face even before anything actually changed. It was subtle, almost invisible, the way his shoulders tightened just slightly, the way his grip on the phone adjusted again, not confident this time, but careful, like he was suddenly aware that it might not protect him the way he thought it would. The man who had stepped into the room did not rush him, did not close the distance in any aggressive way. He simply existed there, steady and certain, and somehow that was enough to make everything else feel unstable by comparison. The rain outside continued its steady rhythm against the window, but inside, the silence had taken on a different weight, one that pressed down on every movement, every breath, every thought. Jason shifted his stance, turning just enough to square himself toward the man, like he was trying to reestablish balance, to remind himself of where he stood in the room, but the effort felt forced, like something rehearsed rather than real. "You do not get to walk in here and make rules," he said, and there was an edge to his voice now, sharper, more deliberate, like he was trying to rebuild something that had already started to break. The man did not respond immediately. Instead, he took another step forward, slow, measured, his gaze never leaving Jason's, and I realized then that he was not reacting to anything being said. He was moving according to something else entirely, something internal, something already decided. The space between them closed just enough that the difference between presence and pressure became impossible to ignore, and for the first time since he had entered, I saw Jason hesitate. It was brief, barely a fraction of a second, but it was there, and it changed everything. The man's attention shifted again, not away, but deeper, like he was focusing on something beneath the surface, something that did not need to be spoken out loud to be understood. Then, without raising his voice, without adding any force to his tone, he said, "Give me the phone." It was not a demand in the way I had expected, not loud or threatening, but it carried something heavier than volume, something that made the words feel less like a request and more like an outcome that had already been accepted. Jason did not move right away. His fingers tightened slightly around the device, his eyes flicking down to it for just a second before returning to the man in front of him, and I could see the calculation again, the attempt to find an angle, a way to turn this back into something he controlled. For a moment it looked like he might argue, might push back, might try to reassert himself in the only way he knew how, but then something shifted again, something small but undeniable, like a realization settling in. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he extended his hand. The phone passed from one to the other without resistance, without struggle, just a quiet transfer that felt far more significant than it should have. The man glanced at the screen briefly, his expression unchanged, then slipped the phone into his coat pocket as if it had always belonged there. That simple movement, that quiet act, seemed to seal something in the room, to finalize a shift that had been building since the moment he stepped through the door. Jason took a step back. Just one. But it was enough. Enough to redraw the space, enough to make it clear that whatever balance had existed before was gone now. No one spoke. No one needed to. The man turned his attention back to me, and this time when he moved, it was different, not slower, not faster, but more intentional, like everything else in the room had already been resolved and I was the only thing left that mattered. He lowered himself slightly, not fully kneeling yet, just enough to bring himself closer to my level, and for the first time since all of this began, I felt something shift inside me that was not fear, not pain, but something else, something I could not name yet. "Stay with me," he said quietly, his voice steady, controlled, but softer now, directed only at me. And I realized then that whatever had just happened between him and Jason had already been decided long before either of them walked into this room. The way he said it did not sound like comfort, and it did not sound like a question either. It sounded like something closer to instruction, the kind you follow without thinking because your body recognizes the authority in it before your mind has time to argue. "Stay with me." I focused on that, on the steadiness of his voice, on the way it cut through the noise in my head and gave me something solid to hold on to, something that did not shift or change or disappear when I needed it most. My vision blurred again. At the edges, dark creeping in slowly, and I forced my eyes open, locking onto him the same way I had locked onto the crack in the ceiling before, except this time it felt different, more anchored, like there was something real behind it instead of just survival. He moved closer, lowering himself fully now, one knee touching the floor beside me, but he still did not reach for me right away. That was what stood out the most. He was close enough to help, close enough to touch, but he waited, watching, assessing, like he was reading something in the way I breathed, the way I held myself, the way my body reacted to even the smallest shift. "Left side," he said quietly, more to himself than to me, and I realized he had already figured it out, already understood what I had not needed to explain. His hand hovered for a second, just above my shoulder, not touching, not yet, giving me space even when I did not have the strength to use it, and then, slowly, carefully, he adjusted the position of his coat, sliding it under my head with a precision that made it clear this was not guesswork. The fabric was warm, dry, a sharp contrast to the cold floor beneath me, and the small change was enough to make my breathing shift slightly, not easier exactly, but more controlled. "Good," he said, almost under his breath, like he was confirming something only he could see. Behind him, I was aware of movement, not chaotic, not rushed, just quiet repositioning, footsteps that did not interrupt, voices that did not rise, like everything in the room had adjusted to him the moment he stepped inside. Jason was still there. I could feel it without looking, the presence, the tension, but it felt distant now, like it had been pushed to the edges of the space, no longer the center of everything. The man in front of me, the one who had answered my message, shifted slightly, his attention narrowing again, focusing entirely on me as if nothing else mattered. "What is your name?" he asked, his tone steady, controlled, but softer than before, like he was pulling me back toward something instead of pushing me forward. "Emily," I managed, the word barely making it out, My voice thinner than I expected, but it was enough. He nodded once, a small, precise movement that felt more significant than it should have. Emily, he repeated, and there was something in the way he said it that grounded me, that made it feel real again, like I was still here, still present, still something more than just a situation on the floor. Stay with me, Emily. Keep your eyes open. His hand moved then, finally, not abrupt, not forceful, just steady, resting lightly near my shoulder, not pressing, not causing pain, just there. A point of contact that did not demand anything from me but gave something in return. Something solid, something certain. I focused on that, on the warmth of it, on the way it did not change even as everything else around me felt unstable. My breathing was still uneven, still shallow, but it followed a rhythm now, guided more by his voice than by my own body. Each inhale measured, each exhale controlled as much as I could manage. You are doing fine, he said, and I did not know if that was true, but the way he said it made it feel possible, made it feel like something I could hold on to for one more second, then another. The room faded slightly at the edges again, but this time I did not fight it the same way. This time I held on to him instead, to the voice, to the presence, to the certainty that had walked through the door and changed everything without raising its volume even once, and somewhere in the back of my mind, through the pain and the confusion and the exhaustion, one thought surfaced, quiet but undeniable. Whoever I had texted, I had not reached help the way I expected. I had reached something else entirely. There is a point where your body stops trying to understand and simply follows what it is given. And that was where I was now, somewhere between awareness and something softer, something that pulled at the edges of my vision and made everything feel just slightly out of reach. His voice stayed steady, anchoring me in place, each word measured, each instruction simple enough that I could follow it without thinking too hard. Stay with me, Emily. I focused on that, on the way he said my name like it was something specific, something intentional, not just a label but a confirmation that I was still here, still present, still worth addressing. My breathing hitched again, uneven, but I forced it into the rhythm he set, in and out, shallow but consistent, holding on to that pattern like it was the only thing keeping everything else from slipping further away. He watched me the entire time, not distracted, not pulled away by anything happening behind him, like the rest of the room no longer existed in the same way it had before. Then, without warning, his gaze shifted slightly, not away from me completely, but enough to include something else in his focus. His hand moved to the inside of his coat, retrieving my phone, the cracked screen lighting up again as it woke in his hand. He studied it for a second, his expression unchanged, but there was a subtle tightening around his eyes, something small but noticeable, like a detail had just confirmed something he already suspected. You did not mean to reach this number, he said, his voice quieter now, more contained, like the words were not meant for anyone else in the room. I blinked, trying to process that, trying to pull my thoughts together enough to respond. I dialed it wrong. I whispered, the admission feeling strange even as I said it, like I was explaining something that should have been obvious. He shook his head once, a slight movement, controlled. No, that line is not listed. The words settled into me slowly, not all at once, but in pieces, each one shifting something inside my understanding of what had just happened. Not listed, not public, not something you could reach by accident. I stared at him, trying to reconcile that with the simple mistake I was sure I had made. The one digit that had changed everything, the one small slip that had led him here, to this room, to me. But his expression did not change, did not soften, did not suggest that he was guessing or assuming. He knew. That was the part that settled the heaviest, the certainty in it, the lack of doubt. Behind him, I heard movement again, quieter now, more distant, like whatever had needed to happen had already been handled, leaving only the aftermath, the adjustment, the reordering of a space that no longer belonged to what it had been before. He did not look back. He did not need to. His attention returned fully to me, but something had shifted in it, something deeper, like he was seeing more than just the immediate situation, more than just the physical state I was in. You typed a number you believed you knew, he continued, his tone calm, almost analytical now, like he was laying out a fact rather than asking a question. And you reached me. There was a pause, not long, but enough to let the words settle, enough for me to feel the weight of them without fully understanding what they meant yet. I tried to respond, tried to form something that made sense, But my thoughts were slipping again, the edges of my vision darkening just slightly as my body reminded me that it was still struggling, still trying to keep up with everything happening at once. He noticed immediately. "Stay with me," he repeated, softer now, his hand shifting slightly, grounding, steady, bringing my focus back to him instead of letting it drift. I clung to that, to the sound of his voice, to the presence that felt more solid than anything else in the room, and somewhere beneath the confusion, beneath the pain, one realization began to take shape, slow but undeniable. I had not just reached the wrong number. I had reached someone who should not have been reachable at all. Understanding does not always arrive all at once. Sometimes it seeps in slowly, like cold water finding its way through cracks you did not know existed. And as I lay there trying to hold onto each breath, I felt that realization begin to spread, quiet but undeniable. This was not random. That was the part that would not let go. My fingers twitched slightly against the floor, a weak, delayed reaction to a thought that came too late to change anything, and I turned my head just enough to keep him in focus, to make sure he was still there, still real, still the same steady presence that had walked through the door and shifted everything without raising his voice once. He was watching me, but not just me, not just my breathing or the way my body struggled to keep up. There was something else behind it now, something deeper, like he was placing me into a context I did not yet understand. "You are still with me," he said, not as a question but as a confirmation, and I forced a small nod, the movement barely there but enough for him to see. "Good. Stay with that." His tone did not change, still controlled, still measured, but there was something underneath it now, something that felt more focused, like he had moved past the immediate urgency and into something else entirely. He adjusted his position slightly, one hand steady near my shoulder, the other briefly checking my wrist, not pressing hard, just enough to confirm what he needed, and I realized again that this was not guesswork, not instinct alone, but experience, practiced and precise. Behind him, the room remained quiet, too quiet for what had just happened, too controlled to belong to anything familiar, and I could feel the absence of noise the same way I had felt the presence of it before, like something had been removed rather than added. He did not look back. He did not need to. "Emily," he said again, drawing my attention fully back to him, grounding me before I could drift too far into the edges of my own thoughts. "Listen to me." His voice lowered slightly, not softer, but more focused, like each word was placed exactly where it needed to be. "You are going to leave this apartment in a moment. You are not going to move on your own. You are going to let them carry you." The way he said it left no room for interpretation, no space for questions, just a clear path forward that felt already decided. Them. That word landed differently because it confirmed what I had already begun to sense, that he had not come alone, that the quiet movement behind him belonged to something organized, something coordinated, something that operated with the same controlled precision he did. I swallowed again, the motion small, but enough to remind me that I was still here, still capable of responding, even if everything felt distant and slightly unreal. "Who are you?" I managed, the question slipping out before I could stop it, because it was the one thing my mind kept circling back to, the one piece that did not fit no matter how I tried to arrange everything else around it. He paused. Not long, not enough to suggest hesitation, but enough to acknowledge the question, to give it weight instead of dismissing it. His eyes held mine, steady, unreadable, and for a second I thought he might not answer at all. Then, quietly, almost like it was not the most important thing in the room, he said, "My name is Adrian." He did not offer anything more than that, no explanation, no title, just the name, simple and contained, like it was enough on its own. "Adrian." I repeated it in my head, trying to attach meaning to it, trying to connect it to something I recognized. But there was nothing, no memory, no reference point, just the name itself and the presence in front of me that made it feel heavier than it should have been. He studied me for another second, then shifted his attention slightly, just enough to signal something without looking away completely, and immediately the quiet movement behind him responded. Footsteps approached, measured and efficient, stopping just short of where we were, waiting, not acting until he allowed it. Everything about it felt coordinated, intentional, like a system I had stepped into without knowing it existed. Adrian looked back at me, his focus narrowing again, bringing everything back to this moment, to me, to the space between us that now felt like the center of everything. "Stay with me, Emily," he said once more, and this time, I understood something I had not fully grasped before. I was not just being helped. I was being moved into something else entirely. Being told you are about to be moved should feel frightening, but what I felt instead was something quieter, something that settled into place rather than rising up, like a decision had already been made somewhere beyond me and I was only now catching up to it. The footsteps behind Adrian stopped just within reach, close enough that I could sense them without needing to turn my head, close enough that I understood they were waiting for him, not for me, not for instructions spoken out loud, but for something unspoken that had already been agreed upon. I focused on breathing again, the rhythm he had given me, in and out, shallow but steady, holding on to it like it was the only thing keeping everything from slipping further away. "You are doing fine," he said again, and this time the words landed differently, not as reassurance but as confirmation, like he was tracking something I could not see and marking each second I stayed conscious as progress toward something larger. The room felt distant now, like it had already started to let me go, like the apartment itself no longer mattered in the same way it had just minutes ago, and I realized I had stopped thinking about it entirely, stopped seeing it as mine, as familiar, as anything other than a place I was leaving behind. Adrian shifted slightly, his hand steady near me, anchoring without pressing, and then he looked past me for the first time since he had entered, not turning fully, just enough to acknowledge the presence behind him. Now, he said a single word, quiet but absolute. The response was immediate. Hands moved into my field of awareness. Not rushed, not careless, but practiced, deliberate, each motion controlled in a way that felt almost rehearsed. They did not grab, did not pull, they adjusted, supported, lifted in a way that minimized movement, that respected the limits my body was already struggling with, and I realized with a strange clarity that whoever they were, they knew exactly what they were doing. My body left the floor slowly, carefully, the cold surface giving way to something more stable, more supported, and for a second, the shift made everything spin, my vision narrowing before I forced it back open, searching for him, finding him immediately where he had been all along. Adrian moved with us, not stepping back, not creating distance, but staying close, his presence constant, his attention fixed on me even as everything else changed around us. "Stay with me, Emily," he repeated, and I nodded slightly, or at least I thought I did, the motion small and uncertain but enough for him to see. The hallway light grew brighter as we moved toward it, the narrow beam widening into something harsher, more defined, and the sounds changed with it, the quiet interior of the apartment giving way to the muted echo of footsteps against concrete, the distant hum of the building, the world outside waiting just beyond the threshold. As we crossed it, I caught a glimpse of the hallway, the worn carpet, the flickering overhead light, details that had always been ordinary suddenly feeling distant, like they belonged to a version of my life that was already closing behind me. No one spoke. No one needed to. The coordination was seamless, the movement continuous like a single action broken into parts that all understood their place without needing direction. We reached the stairs, but did not take them. Instead, we turned, moving toward the back exit, the one that led to the alley where deliveries were made, where no one paid attention, where things happened without being seen. The door opened before we reached it, held by someone I had not noticed before, another presence that fit into the pattern without disrupting it. And then the rain was there again, louder now, closer, the cool air brushing against my face as we stepped outside. The vehicles were closer than I expected, dark shapes lined along the curb, their surfaces reflecting the streetlights in distorted patterns through the rain. One of the doors was already open, waiting, the interior lit softly, revealing something that did not match the outside, something more controlled, more prepared, like it had been arranged specifically for this moment. They moved me toward it without hesitation, without pause, and Adrian stayed with me the entire time, his presence never breaking, never shifting away. As they guided me inside, the world outside blurred further, the rain, the street, the building, all of it fading into something distant, something no longer immediate, and I realized with a clarity that cut through everything else that this was not just leaving. This was crossing into something else entirely, something I had not chosen but had somehow reached anyway, all because of one message sent to a number that was never meant to be found. The inside of the vehicle did not feel like an ambulance, and it did not feel like anything I had been in before either, which was the first thing my mind tried to understand as they settled me onto a surface that adjusted beneath me with quiet precision, supporting without pressure, holding me in place without forcing it. The door closed behind us with a soft, controlled sound that seemed to seal the outside world away, muting the rain into something distant, something that no longer reached me in the same way. The light inside was steady, not harsh, not dim, just enough to make everything clear without overwhelming. And I became aware of small details I would have missed before, the organized layout of equipment, the absence of clutter, the way everything had a place and nothing felt accidental. Adrian remained beside me, not across from me, not separated by space or distance, but close enough that I could focus on him without effort, close enough that his presence continued to anchor everything else. "Stay with me, Emily," he said again, the repetition not tiring but necessary, like a rhythm that kept me from drifting too far away from where I needed to be. I nodded faintly, my eyes finding his, holding there because it was easier than trying to make sense of anything else. Someone to my other side adjusted something near my arm, the movement careful, precise, and I felt a light pressure, then release, nothing sudden, nothing alarming, just a continuation of the same controlled approach that had followed me out of the apartment. My breathing steadied slightly, still shallow, still limited, but guided, supported, and for the first time since everything began, I felt a small shift, not relief, not yet, but the beginning of something that moved in that direction. Adrian watched the change, his attention narrowing just slightly, tracking the difference like it mattered more than anything else happening around us. "Good," he said quietly, and there was something in that word that made it feel earned, like it marked progress I could not fully measure myself. The vehicle began to move, smooth and deliberate, no sudden acceleration, no jolt, just a steady transition that made it feel like we had already been in motion before I noticed it. The world outside passed in blurred shapes through the tinted glass, streetlights stretching into lines, reflections shifting with the rain, everything distant and slightly unreal, like it belonged to a different layer of reality that I was no longer fully part of. I focused back on him, on the steadiness of his expression, the way nothing about him suggested uncertainty or hesitation, and that question came back again, stronger this time, clearer. "Who are you?" I had asked it before, but now it felt heavier, more necessary, because everything about this moment suggested that the answer mattered more than I had first realized. He did not look away. He did not deflect. Instead, he studied me for a second, as if deciding how much to say, how much I needed to understand right now, and then he spoke, his voice as controlled as it had been from the beginning. "You were not meant to reach me," he said, not avoiding the question but answering something deeper beneath it. The words settled slowly, connecting back to what he had said before, the number, the line that was not listed, the impossibility of dialing it by accident. "Then why did I whispered, the question barely there but impossible to hold back now. He paused again, not hesitating but measuring, and for the first time, something shifted in his expression, not uncertainty, but something closer to acknowledgement, like he was recognizing a piece of a pattern he had already seen before. "Because you were supposed to reach someone else," he said quietly, and then, just as evenly, he added, "and you reached me instead." The meaning of that did not fully land at once, but I felt it anyway, the weight of it, the implication that this had not just been a mistake, that something had been redirected, altered in a way neither of us had planned but both of us were now inside of. The vehicle continued forward, steady, controlled, carrying us through a city that no longer felt like mine, and as I lay there, watching him, holding on to the sound of his voice and the certainty in it, I realized that whatever had started with one wrong number had already become something far more complicated than chance. There is a strange kind of quiet that comes after everything changes, not the kind that feels empty, but the kind that feels full, like something has settled into place even if you do not yet understand what it is. I felt that quiet now, stretched out inside the moving vehicle, carried forward without effort, without choice, my body no longer fighting in the same way it had before, my breathing still shallow but steadier, guided by something stronger than panic. The city outside moved past in blurred streaks of light and shadow. Familiar streets turned into something distant and unrecognizable through the tinted glass, like I was watching a life I used to belong to instead of still being inside it. Adrian had not moved away. That was the part my mind kept returning to, the constant in all of this, the one thing that had not shifted or changed since he stepped into that apartment. He remained beside me, his attention steady, his presence controlled, as if everything else could rearrange itself but he would remain exactly where he had decided to be. "No one touches you again," he said, and the words did not sound like comfort. They sounded like a conclusion, like something already enforced rather than promised. I turned my head slightly, just enough to look at him more clearly, to study the expression that never seemed to break, never seemed to reveal more than it chose to, and I realized that whatever he was, whatever world he belonged to, it did not operate on uncertainty. It operated on decisions that did not get reversed. You said I was supposed to reach someone else? I whispered, the question pulling itself together slowly, piece by piece, because it refused to stay quiet. He did not answer immediately, and for a moment I thought he might let it pass, might leave it where it was, unanswered and unresolved. But then he exhaled slowly, his gaze shifting just slightly, not away, but inward, like he was selecting which part of the truth to give me. There was another number, he said, his voice even measured, like he was explaining something simple even though it did not feel simple at all. Someone you trusted. Someone who would have called for help the way you expected. I swallowed, the motion small but deliberate, because I knew exactly who that was meant to be, the person I had intended to reach, the life I thought I still had control over just minutes before everything changed. And instead, I said, the words barely audible, you answered. His eyes returned fully to mine then, steady, unflinching, and there was something in that look that felt less like coincidence and more like recognition. Yes, he said. I answered. The simplicity of it made it heavier, not lighter, because it removed the idea of chance entirely, replaced it with something else, something I could not fully define but could feel all the same. The vehicle slowed slightly, the motion subtle but noticeable, and I felt the shift before I saw it, the change in direction, the quiet coordination of something arriving at its next point. We are almost there, he said, not as reassurance but as information, another step in something already in motion. My eyelids felt heavier now, the edges of my vision softening again, but this time it did not feel like losing control, it felt like being carried through it, like I did not have to fight every second on my own anymore. I held onto his voice one last time, onto the steadiness of it, onto the certainty that had replaced the chaos I started in, and as everything around me faded just slightly, one thought remained, clear and unshaken. I had asked for help. But what found me was not something you call. It was something that chooses whether to answer. And for reasons I did not yet understand, it had chosen me.